If you ever owned an early copy of Blue Sky's 2002 film Ice Age, you might have had a bonus features disc alongside it. If you ever went into that bonus feature disc, you might have seen what I'm going to be talking about today. And if you were anywhere between the ages of baby to teenager when you first saw it, you might have been traumatized for life. And the title of this short betrays its nature as honestly one of the first horror thrillers I ever saw, with a story beneath its surface that is far more than an elderly rabbit sadistically murdering a terroristic moth. Let's chat about Bunny. Bunny is a 1998 short film written and directed by Wedge and was released by Blue Sky Studios. This is now a Disney short film by acquisition, as Blue Sky Studios became part of 20th Century Fox in 1999 after the critical success of Bunny, and 20th Century Fox was purchased by the Walt Disney Company in March of 2019. And yes, I said critical success. This short film that haunted my nightmares as a kid, Venicus, won the 1998 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film.
Bunny! Wedge!
Thank you, Fleck. Thank you, members of the Academy. This award is especially thrilling because it's been a labor of love, Bunny.
Bunny is frightening for a variety of reasons. However, I think it's important to note that especially now, the technology used to create the short film is undoubtedly antique in comparison to the systems in place to create animated films like Toy Story 4 and the short film Piper. With that comes noticing things like the character rigidity, more polygonized models, or limited texturing. While I may reference those things in this essay, they aren't really influencing the fear factor that I'm speaking about in this essay compared to that which was found possibly in Michigan, where a lot of the contemporary fear was found in the warped audio. Okay? Cool. I'm not going to give a beat-by-beat summary and instead discuss two aspects of the film that adds to its melancholy tone. First, let's talk about the use of score and soundtrack in the piece. The score in this film is not overused, only really starting up during key moments. Opening titles, we have some nice soft accordion to go along with the gentle flaps of the moth's wings towards the light. It fades out once we enter the real world, with the moth now dinging into a cabin's porch light. We go for about a minute and a half with no accompaniment, only the sound of crickets and Foley sound effects to go along with the bunny's baking. We are reintroduced to the score once the moth returns back into the cabin after being shooed away in an earlier story beat. In this segment, the music's tempo is unsteady, with a wailing trumpet behind a hurrying piano and startled violin section that reminds me of the end credit music for the first Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared short. The music exits once the moth flies away into the night sky, only to return back later on in the night. Before we move on, I want to point out that this music feels very crafty in nature. It's debatable whether or not the moth is malicious in intention throughout the short if you're simply following its actions, but the addition of the score solidifies, in my mind, the idea that the moth is operating with a plan. Thus, it is not an accident when the protagonist rabbit knocks the screen off of the windowsill when she slams the window shut, but something that the moth was hoping to have happen in order to get inside the house once more. This claim is supported by the idea that the score only revamps once the moth returns into the house. The music is not only still malevolent, but better put together and orchestrated in nature. The moth has returned with a plan in order to return back into the rabbit's life and reach the light. The score dies down once the moth dies after being smacked with the rabbit's wooden spoon, only to return with a vengeance while the rabbit seeks her own vengeance. Once we enter the final act, the rest of the short is orchestrated, but different beats are still treated with different musical accompaniments. The violins are slowly brought back to life as it seems that there could be an undead moth within the oven, but a curious piano is introduced once the bunny comes face to face with them. The accordion finally returns once we see the opening revisited, with the moth leading the bunny towards the same light the moth was headed towards in the beginning. We'll talk about this, and this, and this in a minute, but I did want to point out some of the most prevalent motifs in the music throughout the short. As I alluded to just a moment ago, the accordion is only brought into the music once peace has been found, in this massive abyss of stars and light. The tempo of the score throughout the malevolent plans becomes faster and faster, first with the moth, then with the bunny. This more sinister music clashes with the bookended peace that comes with the accordion, and for good reason. The trumpet and violin act as screeches, as things to alarm the audience and punctuate choices made by both the protagonist and antagonist. The methodical pace of what seems to be a tuba, pardon my lack of band instrument knowledge, in the background is uneven, also throwing the audience off guard. Without this music, this segment may act more as a comedy, but due to its unnerving nature, this becomes a frightened moment. The credits are the only piece of music with lyrics attached. The song is called Bend Down the Branches, performed by Tom Waits. The music describes the passing on from life to death. The sky's as deep as it can be. Bend down the branches. Close your eyes and you will see. Bend down the branches. You're like a willow. Once you were gold. We're made for bending. Even beauty gets old. Climb the stairs. They're not so steep. Bend down the branches. Close your eyes and go to sleep. Bend down the branches. A song of peaceful passing, of older generations continuing forwards. Keep this in mind as we continue on to the second part of this dissection, the meaning. Bunny is, in essence, the story of a widow unable to move on. We find the titular protagonist Bunny in a cabin in the middle of what appears to be the South or perhaps the Midwest. As revealed at the end of the first act, she appears to be without current company, and there are no pictures or indications of children or grandchildren. Her husband is shown to have passed on by way of the moth knocking into an antique wedding photo of two younger rabbits, causing it to go askew. Once getting rid of the moth, the bunny returns and straightens the photo out, before gazing upon it with a melancholy glance. Now you might be thinking, William, what if that was her daughter or son? That's possible, but highly unlikely. Where the photo once hung is an obvious indication of the fact that this is the bunny and her husband, the dirt line. We see that this has been hung up for a long while, unmoved to the point that years and years of grime has grown around it. If this was the bunny's child's wedding photo, this layer of soot around the photograph would be highly unlikely. This is also supported by a future moment, but let's hold on to that for now. The film's ending is also highly provocative in its imagery, but supports the motif of passing on. Just before the oven moth vision occurs, we see the rabbit moving much faster and using much more energy than she was at the beginning of the short. She churns the dead moth into the cake batter, hopping over to the oven and tossing the pan in haphazardly. She then rushes across the house to sit down. This is all done at a dangerously fast pace, especially for an elderly bunny. All of this anger, all of this hatred, all of this grief that she's been holding on to while staying alone in this cabin, it's taken out the last of her energy. A while later, the oven begins to shake. Confused and frightened, the bunny then moves across the room without using her walker, which is worth pointing out because she usually depends on it to move, as seen earlier, and prepares herself to attack whatever's coming out of the oven. The door swings down with a blue glow, the same hue that we've seen in the beginning. She comes face to face with the moth, which greets her and brings her across the gateway to the other side, as she climbs through the oven. As she floats in space, in a nebulous of stars, she sprouts wings and joins the moth, flying towards that ethereal light in the sky. The two are then surrounded by dozens of other moths, all also moving towards the beyond. This isn't a malevolent spirit disguised as a moth. This is some sort of angel, joined by its brethren or those who have also continued on. The final shot is the wedding photograph, where we see the bride and groom moving together, and reflected in the glass of the photo frame, two moths, whose wings land on the backs of the couple. This shot helps to reinterpret the entire film, as it shows that the moth who was in front of the bunny all along was the spirit of her passed-on husband, there to encourage her to move on, move forward, or eventually to guide her on to pass. Going back to the moment where the bunny moves without her walker, it seems plausible for interpretation that this might be a sort of post-death vision, what the bunny is imagining while she fades away. But this final shot of the moths landing on the backs of the bunnies proves the point that this wasn't imaginary, but it was reality. How could she move without her walker then? Perhaps this is indeed the bunny spirit moving towards that great beyond, unburdened by her worldly restrictions. She then sprouts wings and flies into that ethereal beyond, reuniting with her husband that has guided her to this point. There's also this shot where the moth is repeatedly slamming into the wedding photograph, The moth is hitting the image of the husband over and over and over again, calling out to his widowed wife. All of this interpretation has been seemingly confirmed by the director and writer, Chris Wedge, in a clip dictated on Wikipedia that I cannot locate online. I faintly remember this on the Ice Age DVD, this one in particular, but I no longer own it and thus cannot show the clip. The introduction is said to include Chris Wedge explaining, and I quote from the online encyclopedia, "Bunny dies from a hiccup caused by kidney failure, and the oven serves as a gateway to the afterlife. Her spirit is instinctively drawn into it, as a moth moving towards the bright light, and reunited with that of her husband." The image of the wedding picture moves to show the two bunnies embracing, echoing the love from so long ago. The bunny no longer needs to hold on to the anguish and grief that she's had from her isolation. She's no longer alone in the forest, baking a carrot cake for nobody but herself. She's with the one she loved. She's continued on. You're like a willow. Once you were gold. We're made for bending. Even beauty gets old. Climb the stairs, they're not so steep. Bend down the branches. Close your eyes and go to sleep. Bend down the branches. Thank you for watching this video essay about Bunny. This is the capstone project for the end of my film essay class in college, and I want to take this moment to thank Professor Ruth, Brian, Stephen, Kellen, and Jake. I have truly loved this class. Being able to produce videos every week and share it with you guys has been an immense pleasure and something that has kept me through quarantine and classes during quarantine. You all are insanely talented people, and I would love to collaborate with you in the future and for you to keep in contact with the work that you make. Thank you all for your advice, for your criticism, for your abundance of compliments, and for being very, very good people. Take care, you five, and I'll talk to you again soon.